Some heroes don't wear uniforms, they board quietly, sit by the window, and say nothing. Harrison Ford hadn't flown in years, not since he walked away from the skies that once defined him. But on a routine morning flight over the Rockies, fate handed him the controls he thought he'd left behind. And when everything started falling apart at 30,000 feet, it wasn't a badge or a title that saved 181 lives. It was instinct and a man who knew when to stand up. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport buzzed with its usual early morning rush. Coffee lines curled like snakes through crowded terminals. Announcements echoed overhead. Gate agents smiled with scripted warmth. Among the swirl of motion, a man stood quietly near Gate B-17, shoulders relaxed, hands in his jacket pockets. He wore a dark windbreaker, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Nothing about him stood out. That was the point. "Morning, sir," a young ground crew tech said, glancing at his boarding pass. He looked up at the older man and paused. "You retired Air Force?" The man smiled politely, just enough to soften the question. "Used to fly a bit." "Nothing fancy." The tech nodded, shrugged, and waved him through. Harrison Ford stepped onto the jet bridge like any other traveler. His gait was steady, unhurried. The kind of walk that came from decades of trusting his legs, even in unpredictable terrain. Flight 982 to Denver. Middle range, early morning, mostly business flyers. He found his seat, 3A window side, near the front. As he slid into the seat, the passenger beside him glanced up briefly, offered a nod, then turned back to scrolling on his phone. "Crazy," the man said, tapping his screen. "They're doing a reboot of Air Force One, like they could top the original." Ford smirked faintly. "Good luck to them," he murmured. The engines whined softly as passengers settled in. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking seat belts, reminding folks about tray tables. Ford adjusted the air vent above his head, then leaned back slightly, eyes closed, not to sleep, just to listen. The low-frequency hum of the left engine didn't quite match the right. A minor inconsistency, most wouldn't notice, but his brow twitched slightly. He didn't say anything. Instead, he opened the safety card from the seat pocket, glanced at it like a regular passenger. The woman across the aisle was FaceTiming her daughter. A man in 3C was already asleep, neck pillow in place. Ford folded the card, tucked it back in place. A young woman passed by in uniform, flight crew. She paused momentarily when she saw him. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, then uncertainty. "Sorry, sir, have we met?" He looked up, calm and unreadable. "I don't think so." She smiled nervously and continued. The engines powered up. The aircraft began to taxi. Ford looked out the window. The tarmac shimmered faintly under the early light. Dew clung to the wingtips. As the plane turned toward the runway, he rested one hand on the armrest, the other on his thigh. The seat belt sat loosely across his lap. Takeoff was smooth, standard climb, no surprises. But the sound, that subtle uneven pitch in the left engine, persisted, just enough to be off. Ford didn't react. Not yet. He'd flown long enough to know the difference between unusual and unsafe. He leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. The clouds outside drifted past like slow ghosts. In his jacket pocket sat an old flight tag from his rescue days in Wyoming. The print was faded now, but the weight of it never left. Today, he told himself, he was just a passenger, just a man flying home. At least, that's what he believed, for now. At 32,000 feet, Flight 982 hummed steadily above the Rocky Mountains. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, casting soft light on tray tables and half-read magazines. Somewhere near the back, a baby cried. In the galley, a flight attendant poured orange juice into small plastic cups, chatting quietly with her colleague. Laughter here and there, clicks of seatbelt buckles, everything felt normal. Harrison Ford sat in seat 3A, unmoved, arms folded, eyes closed. But he wasn't sleeping. He was listening again, to the engines, to the air, to the silence between sounds. There it was, a shift. The left engine's pitch dropped half a tone, then rose again, like a note bent wrong. Most passengers wouldn't notice it. Most pilots wouldn't either. not unless they had a habit of flying vintage seaplanes through fire and wind. Ford's eyes opened slowly. Ahead in the cockpit, the co-pilot's jaw tensed as he stared at the display. His right hand hovered over the radio controls, then pulled back. He whispered something to the captain. The captain leaned forward, scanning the instrument panel. In the cabin, turbulence hit. A single jolt, sharp and unexpected. A coffee cup tipped onto a laptop. A child yelped. Ford's hand went to the armrest, not in panic, just readiness. Then, for a moment, everything stilled, until it didn't. The second jolt was worse. The plane rocked left, then right. A flight attendant stumbled, catching herself on a seat. One overhead bin popped open, spilling a backpack into the aisle. Row 14 screamed. Ford didn't flinch. He glanced at the overhead panel. No lights, not yet. Then the voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're experiencing a patch of unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We'll be through it shortly." The voice was trying to sound calm. It was. There was too much breath in it, too much pause. Ford looked forward. The cockpit door remained shut. He reached down, tightened his seatbelt, and exhaled once. The plane lurched again, this time with a deep groan through the fuselage. A high-pitched vibration pulsed underfoot. Ford placed his hand flat against the wall beneath the window. He closed his eyes for half a second. That wasn't turbulence, that was imbalance. Mechanical, his brow furrowed. 3 rows back, a water bottle flew from a tray and rolled down the aisle. A woman cried out. 2 men tried to unbuckle to help her, but were ordered to stay seated. Then it happened. The oxygen masks dropped, not in every row. But enough to change the air. Gasps, screams. A child began sobbing uncontrollably. The baby from earlier joined in. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. A warning chime buzzed softly, muffled behind the cockpit door. Ford didn't panic. He didn't look around. He didn't reach for the mask. He watched, listened, counted. 1, 2, 3, another drop in altitude, but controlled just barely. The man beside him had turned pale, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "Is this normal?" he muttered. Ford didn't answer. His eyes were fixed forward. From the galley, a flight attendant moved up the aisle, gripping each seat for balance. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. As she passed Ford's row, she paused, just for a second. She looked at him, he looked back. Something in his posture, calm, still, focused, made her stop. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said it. "You know." Ford gave the smallest nod. He wasn't just a man listening to engines. He was waiting for the moment he hoped wouldn't come. But now he wasn't so sure. The cabin had tilted just enough to make drinks slide on tray tables. Not violently, just unnaturally. The kind of tilt that told you something wasn't being controlled anymore. 1 degree off now, 10 degrees later. In row 19, a woman screamed and clutched her partner's arm. He tried to reassure her, but his voice was too high, too thin. In the forward galley, a flight attendant dropped a stack of water cups. They scattered across the floor like dice. She bent down to gather them, but when the plane jolted again, she lost balance and fell hard against the wall. Harrison Ford stood up. One motion, no hesitation, not rushed, not theatrical, just necessary. He reached out and helped the attendant to her feet. She blinked, breath caught in her chest, trying to focus. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, barely. He didn't let go of her arm. "I flew medevacs," he said quietly. "Let me help." Her eyes snapped up, confused, alarmed, searching. "Your weight," she stammered. "Are you?" He cut her off with a calm shake of the head. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said. "Just tell the captain time's running out." She stared at him a beat longer, then nodded, and ran. Behind him, a man had slumped in his seat, breathing rapidly into an oxygen mask. Across the aisle, a teenager was sobbing silently, shoulders shaking beneath a hoodie. Someone shouted something about calling the FAA. Another argued with a flight attendant about getting their bag. The panic was growing louder, but Ford didn't move with it. He stood still, eyes forward, waiting. He didn't need to see the cockpit to know what was happening inside. He'd been there before, not in this aircraft, not at this altitude, but in moments like this, when the numbers didn't add up, and the instinct screamed louder than the instruments. He looked back down the aisle. The flight attendant was gone. Moments passed, long enough for doubt to set in. Maybe they'd refuse. Maybe the captain would ignore the offer. Maybe he'd be told to sit back down like every other passenger. He sat again, but only halfway, hands on his knees. Ready, he closed his eyes. In his mind, a checklist unfolded: altitude, engine status, airspeed, redundancies. Another drop, short but sharp. The cabin collectively gasped, then silence. Not peace, just the absence of noise. Finally, the flight attendant returned. She leaned down beside him, voice low. "The co-pilot's unconscious," she said. "The captain wants to see you now." Ford looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. He rose, steady as ever, and began walking toward the cockpit. People turned to look. Some recognized him, others just saw a man moving with purpose. No one stopped him, no one could. The hallway between him and the cockpit felt narrow, like a tunnel. Crying children blurred into the hum of emergency lights. Oxygen masks swayed gently from the ceiling. A passenger crossed himself and whispered a prayer. Ford kept walking. He didn't look afraid, he didn't look heroic, he looked inevitable, and when he reached the door, it opened. Because sometimes, in the middle of chaos, when no one moves, he does. The cockpit smelled of stress and burning plastic. Warning lights blinked across the upper panel like a string of broken Christmas lights. The co-pilot slumped in his seat, mask on, eyes shut, completely unresponsive. The captain sat rigid in the left seat, one hand gripping the yoke, the other wiping sweat from his brow. His jaw clenched as he fought to keep the aircraft stable. Then the door opened. Harrison Ford stepped inside. For a second, the captain just stared, eyes wide, confused. Are you the Harrison Ford?" Ford didn't blink. "Used to land in worse places," he said. "You want to argue or land this thing?" The captain hesitated. He looked back at the blinking red across his controls, looked at the co-pilot, then back at Ford. He nodded. "Take the right seat." Ford moved without ceremony. He checked the co-pilot's vitals briefly, weak pulse, shallow breath. Altitude pressure likely hit him hard. Not surprising, not helpful. He slipped into the right seat, strapped in, scanned the panel. The autopilot was dead. The left engine wasn't just failing, it was gone. The right engine ran hot, dangerously close to shutdown. Hydraulic pressure fluctuated. Navigation system froze on a looped terrain map. "Throttles spiking," Ford said. "I know," the captain replied. "We are running blind. No ATC contact for over 15 minutes. Ford looked out the windshield. The Rockies stretched below them, vast and jagged and waiting. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the horizon. "You can't make Denver like this," he said. "I know." Ford reached into the side panel, pulled out the backup tablet. The screen flickered. Digital terrain maps loaded, slow and incomplete. He tapped through several layers, zoomed out. "You ever heard of Mackenzie Ridge?" The captain frowned. "No. It's not in our system. It wouldn't be. Decommissioned airstrip. Military, not on commercial charts. I landed there 20 years ago. Medevac pulled during wildfire season. It's rough, short, probably cracked all to hell. But if we can hold glide path and bleed speed, it might work." The captain exhaled, slow. "You're sure?" "No," Ford said, "but I've seen worse, and we're running out of airspace." The younger pilot looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since the turbulence began, his grip loosened on the yoke. "Okay, you guide, I'll stabilize." Together, they worked. Ford rerouted remaining battery power to auxiliary instruments. The artificial horizon wavered, then steadied just enough to use. He recalibrated pitch manually, watching the numbers fall into something close to alignment. The captain kept the nose from dipping, read off airspeed and climb rate. They didn't speak more than they had to. Every second mattered. Outside, the sky looked calm. Inside, the aircraft fought back. Ford scanned the map again, double-checked coordinates. Mackenzie Ridge was within glide range barely. He noted elevation, wind vectors, possible approach paths. "There's a southern gap in the tree line," he said. "If we come in low, shallow, with minimum flare, we might have a shot." "Might. It's better than dropping into a ravine." The captain didn't argue. He adjusted trim. Below, the landscape rose to meet them, Pine forests, rocky slopes. No flat land anywhere. Ford toggled radio to back up emergency frequency. A burst of static, then a faint signal, just enough to send coordinates. Somebody's listening, he said. Far ahead, too faint to confirm, something blinked, headlights maybe, flash signals, civilian responders moving fast. Ford didn't smile, he didn't speak. He just looked forward, hands steady on the controls, as the forgotten airstrip that saved lives once before came into sight again. And this time, it might have to save a whole plane. The sun had begun to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the mountains below. In the distance, Mackenzie Ridge came into view, a narrow strip of cracked concrete carved out of forest and rock. The old airstrip looked more like a ghost than a runway, flanked by pine trees and sloping ground. But it was there, barely. In the cockpit, Harrison Ford stared at the horizon, scanning every detail. "Visual on the strip," he said. The captain nodded, sweat clinging to his hairline. Ford reached for the backup inspection camera, grainy and low-res. The image flickered, showing the belly of the plane. "One gear's down," he said. "The others can't confirm." The captain swallowed. "So we're going in blind." Ford didn't look at him. Landing blind could be a slide or a stop, no in-between. There was a pause, a long one. Then Ford added, voice even. "I fly, you monitor systems. We don't have margin for ego." The captain looked at him. "You've done this before." Ford didn't answer. He just placed both hands on the yoke. That was enough. The captain nodded and slowly took his hands off the controls. Outside, the last of the light faded behind the ridge. What remained came from the ground, headlights, flares, flashlights, all scrambled together by responders who had barely enough time to react to the emergency ping Ford had sent. The approach angle was steep, too steep, but there was no arc, no room for a wide descent, only one shot, straight in, short and fast. The aircraft groaned as it dropped elevation. Inside the cabin, the passengers were silent. Some held hands, others whispered prayers. One man clutched a photograph of his children. A mother hugged her baby so tightly her knuckles went white. In the front row, a child stared out the window, watching the trees rise up to meet them. Ford didn't speak. His face was stone, but every muscle was active, every sense engaged. "Flaps are unresponsive," the captain said. "Forget flaps," Ford replied. "We are flying raw." He adjusted trim manually, coaxing the nose into a shallower angle. The stick shook in protest. The stall warning light blinked, then blinked again. "Stall alert," the captain said. "I see it," Ford said. "Ignore it." Below them, the treetops blurred into motion. The runway was dead ahead, narrow, uneven, patched together by time and luck. Ford took one breath. "Brace," he said. Then the wheels touched, hard. The front hit first, bounced. Then the rear slammed down with a metal scream. Sparks exploded beneath the fuselage. The plane skidded, tilted, then caught friction. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. The screech of metal on concrete vibrated through every rib and every tooth. Ford fought the controls, trying to keep the aircraft aligned as it tore down the ancient strip. One tire blew, then another. Still, they slid forward. The edge of the forest came fast, too fast. Ford reached for manual brakes, pulled hard, smoke billowed from beneath. The entire aircraft groaned in resistance, then impact stopped. The plane lurched forward, then stillness, silence. It had stopped just 38 feet from the tree line. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then, from somewhere near the front of coach, a small voice whispered, "We are not dead." And the cabin erupted. Laughter, tears, sobs, disbelief. People hugged strangers. One flight attendant collapsed onto the galley floor and started shaking. Another just stood frozen, mouth open, eyes wet. Ford didn't move. He sat in the cockpit, hands still on the yoke, eyes forward, chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. The captain turned to him, stunned. "You landed it," he said. "You actually." Ford cut him off gently. "No, we landed it." He unbuckled slowly and leaned back, letting the silence return. Outside, responders rushed toward the aircraft, flashlights cutting through smoke and darkness. Inside, Ford closed his eyes just for a moment. He hadn't just landed a plane. He'd returned to the sky he once walked away from, and proved that what the world thought he'd left behind had never truly left him. The sky had faded into dusk, streaked with ash-colored clouds. Emergency lights flickered across the ridge, casting long shadows against the cracked concrete. Fire crews moved slowly now, spraying down what little heat remained beneath the plane's damaged frame. The worst was over. But the air still carried the weight of what almost happened. Harrison Ford sat alone on the back bumper of a fire truck, his jacket unzipped, his hands resting loosely between his knees. Behind him, the aircraft stood still and smoking, a wounded beast that had somehow made it home. Reporters swarmed outside the perimeter, cameras flashing, microphones lifted, voices calling his name. But he didn't look at them. He watched the plane. One of the flight attendants approached quietly, the same one he had helped to her feet hours earlier. Her face was tired but soft now, grateful. "They want to do a press event," she said. "The airline, the FAA, Governor too. All the headlines already say your name." Ford didn't turn. He didn't answer right away. She added, almost as if apologizing, "They want to call it the landing of the decade." He exhaled once through his nose. "Only if they fund something that lasts longer than applause," he said. She paused. "What do you mean?" He finally looked at her. "Scholarships, real ones, not photo ops, flight training for kids who never thought they'd touch a cockpit, small towns, rural communities, the places where dreams don't always have maps." The attendant blinked. "I can tell them," she said. "You should," he replied. Beyond the crowd, behind a chain-link fence near the end of the strip, a small girl stood holding her mother's hand. She looked no older than 10. Her eyes never left him. She wasn't smiling. She was staring, focused, like someone seeing the future unfold. Ford saw her. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and she lit up like someone had handed her a reason. That night, he refused every interview. He left the airfield quietly, no escort, no headlines. Just a quiet ride to a volunteer bunkhouse the rescue crew had offered him. The next morning, while his face was on every news outlet in America, Ford sat on a folding chair beside a broken vending machine and made a phone call to the airline. By week's end, the Ford Sky Initiative was announced. Not a tour, not a memoir, not a brand deal, just an agreement. The airline would fund a full-scale scholarship program for aspiring pilots in underserved areas. Equipment, instruction, mentorship. No names on buildings, no plaques, just runway and opportunity. Reporters kept calling. He never answered. The captain wrote a statement praising him as the calmest man he'd ever flown with. The co-pilot, once recovered, told the press that the plane only landed because someone in the back still believed in instinct. But Ford said nothing, because it wasn't about what he said. It was about what he did. And when he looked out that night toward the dark silhouette of the sky, he didn't see headlines. He saw hands on controls. He saw futures that had almost been lost. And he saw a little girl behind a fence who now believed she belonged in the air. The air over Mackenzie Ridge smelled of pine and engine oil. A soft breeze moved through the trees, rustling leaves now turning golden with early autumn. The cracked concrete that once caught the weight of a failing jet had been patched, painted, and reborn. Where brush once grew wild, runway lights now blinked. A hangar stood to the north, modest, functional. Inside it, dreams in motion. Harrison Ford stood near the edge of the strip, arms folded, eyes locked on the sky. A single-engine trainer climbed above the treetops, nose steady, wings balanced. Behind the yoke sat a girl of 16, determined hands, focused eyes. Her name was Lily. 1 year earlier, she had clung to her older brother Jacob's arm in the middle of Flight 982, crying, terrified, certain the world was ending. Now she was flying, solo. Jacob stood nearby in uniform, watching her plane disappear into blue. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face said everything. Ford glanced at him, gave a small nod. Jacob nodded back. The wind picked up slightly. Ford squinted at the sky just as the plane banked gently to the right, tracing a perfect arc over the ridge. He said nothing, didn't clap, didn't smile, just watched. Behind him, a student laughed from the hangar. Another shouted coordinates during a drill. The air was alive with learning, with effort, with second chances. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the message. Flight 982 reunion. They want you to speak. He looked down at the screen for a long moment, then typed, tell them I'll be there, but let them know I was never alone up there. He slipped the phone away, watched the sky, watched the girl make her turn. Watched a moment that didn't belong to him, but one he helped make possible. A year ago, people called him a hero, a legend, but he never wanted that. He didn't need a statue or a speech. He just needed this. A sky remembered. A plane that flew, a kid who believed she could, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the greatest flight isn't the one you take. It's the one you give to someone else. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.